Good day everyone, and welcome to this video on the ultravirus principle. Ultravirus is a common law principle which we can translate as beyond the legal authority, meaning when an action or conduct is ultravirus, the person has acted beyond or outside of what the law allows them to do. This is a principle of legality, which is a constitutional principle in South Africa, and it is all about the exercise of public power whenever the state or government is involved. The ultravirus principle becomes important so as to prevent an abuse of power. This principle has also been codified in the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, which describes the principles for a legal action. So when an action is within the boundaries of what the law allows, we will say it is an intravirus action. And this principle of ultravirus applies whenever an administrative action or executive functions are involved. So, for example, when a school principal disciplines a teacher, or when the Department of Education, as the employer of the teacher, disciplines a teacher, or when a teacher is appointed, or when a learner is disciplined, maybe the learner is searched, or maybe the learner is suspended. All of those are examples of administrative actions, which are the actions that take place when legislation is applied by the employees of the Department of Education, for example, the principal or the teacher or government officials. So the legality principle or the ultravirus principle prescribes that an executive may not act beyond the legal authority which is afforded to them. When a person acts ultravirus, it means that their action or their conduct has exceeded the powers or the competence as was stipulated in legislation. When an action is intravirus, it means that the action met the requirements for a valid and lawful administrative action, and then that would mean the action is intravirus, it is within the powers or the competence stipulated by the law. And these requirements are found in the common law, but they have been codified in the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. So what makes an action intravirus? What are the requirements for an action to be valid and legal and within the boundaries of the powers or the competence afforded to the person? According to the common law principles, an action must have the person who does the action or executes the action must have the legal authority to do so. In other words, if the law assigned a particular power or authority or competence to you, you may act accordingly. An example of an action which has a legal authority is when the school governing body adopts a code of conduct for learners and suspends a learner in terms of that code of conduct. The South African Schools Act gave the governing body the authority to do that, and thus that would be an action which is intravirus. But if the school principal, for example, suspends a learner, that action will be ultravirus because the school principal does not have the legal authority to suspend a learner. A second requirement for an intravirus action in terms of the common law is that that specific action may be executed only by the authorized person. Thus, the authorized person should not delegate that action, and another person may not take over from the authorized person or conduct the actions according to their own discretion if they are not the authorized person. A third requirement for intravirus action is that it must comply with contextual and procedural requirements. If we can use the example of a suspension of learners again, Section 9 of the Schools Act provides certain procedures, and Section 8 of the Schools Act also provides for certain procedural requirements. How should a fair hearing or disciplinary proceedings be conducted, and what steps should be followed for a learner to be suspended. If the governing body has closely followed those requirements or procedures that are prescribed, that action will be intravirus. But if the governing body did not follow those procedures, their action would be ultravirus and then would actually not be a lawful action. A fourth requirement for intravirus actions is that the person should act fairly and reasonably. Whenever we act unfairly or in an unreasonable manner, that action would not meet the requirements of an ultravirus action. And then lastly, if a person has acted outside of the boundaries of their powers, they may be held legally liable for such ultravirus action. So these were the common law requirements for an intravirus action. Then the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act provides for certain requirements as well, which are very similar to the common law requirements, but they have been codified in the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, and therefore we will use them. The first one is that the administrative action may not contravene the Constitution. So whenever you act in a way that contravenes the Constitution, such an action would be an ultravirus action. Then the action must be authorized by empowering legislation. So this is similar to the common law requirement. The decision taken must be taken only by the authorized person, which is also similar to the common law requirement. Again, similar to common law requirement, it should comply with the procedures and the conditions prescribed by legislation. And then another one was added: administrative action must be taken for a reason authorized in the empowering legislation. So not only should the action be within the authorization of who and how, but also the why of administrative action. So there you have the requirements for an administrative action to be intravirus. So remember, ultravirus action is an action beyond the powers or beyond the competence that's as stipulated in legislation, and intravirus would be an administrative action that meets the requirements for valid and lawful administrative action. Remember that when we talk about ultravirus action, it is not just any person who acts in any way that might be illegal or is illegal. We apply ultravirus principle to administrative action, which is the actions taken by someone who holds a position of authority when they apply or implement legislation.